Rain dropped loudly onto the roof of the Land Cruiser. Tim felt the night vision goggles pressing heavily on his forehead. He reached for the knob near his ear and adjusted the intensity. Dr. Grant was staring out of the front of the windshield towards him. Tim saw him pick up the radio from the dash. There was a burst of static, and then he heard Dr. Grant's voice.
Can you see us back here?
Tim picked up the radio from Ed Regis. I see you.
Everything all right?
We're fine, Dr. Grant.
Stay in the car.
We will, don't worry. He clicked the radio off. Ed Regis snorted. It's pouring down rain. Of course we're staying in the car, he muttered. Tim turned to look at the foliage at the other side of the road. Through the goggles, the foliage was bright electronic green, and beyond he could see the sections of green drip patterns of the fences. The Land Cruiser was stopped in the down slump of the hill, which must mean they were somewhere near the Tyrannosaur area. It would be amazing to see the Tyrannosaur with these night vision goggles. But he didn't see anything, and eventually he stopped looking. Everyone in the car felt silent, the rain crumbling on the roof of the car. Sheet of water streaming down over the sides of the windows. It was hard for Tim to see out, even with the goggles. How long have we been sitting here? Malcolm asked. I don't know. 4 to 5 minutes. I wonder what's the problem is. Maybe the short circuits of the rain. But it happened before the rain really started.
But there's no lightning, right?
What was that? We didn't quite read that.
Just my sister talking.
Oh. I'm hungry. I know that, Lex, Regis said, but we're stuck here, sweetie. The cars run on electricity, in buried cables in the road. Stuck for how long? Until they fix the electricity. Oh no. Take it easy, honey, Ed Regis said. It's just lightning. Tim again scanned the foliage, but saw nothing. Certainly nothing as big as a Tyrannosaur. He began to wonder if the Tyrannosaur came up at night. Were there nocturnal animals? Tim wasn't sure if he had ever read that. He had the feeling the Tyrannosaur were all-weather, day or night animals. The time of day doesn't matter to a Tyrannosaur. The rain continued to pour. Hell of a rain, Ed Regis said. It's really coming down. Listening to the sound of the rain, Tim felt himself growing sleepy. He yawned and turned to look at the palm trees on the left side of the road and was staring by a sudden thump as the ground shook. He swung back just in time to catch a glimpse of a dark shape as it swept across the road between the two cars. Jesus! What is it? It was huge! It was big as a car! Tim, are you there? He picked up the radio. Yes, I'm here. Did you see it, Tim?
No. I missed it.
What the hell was it? Malcolm said. Are you wearing the night vision goggles, Tim? Yes, I'll watch. Was it a Tyrannosaur? Ed Regis asked. I don't think so. It was in the road. But didn't you see it? Ed Regis said. No. Tim felt bad that he had missed seeing the animal, whatever it was. Tim scanned the side of the road. The rain was coming down hard now, shaking the leaves of hammering drops. It made everything move. Everything seemed alive. He scanned the leaves. He stopped. There was something beyond the leaves. Tim looked up higher. Behind the foliage, beyond the fence, he saw a thick body with pebbles, grainy surface like the part of the trees. But it wasn't a tree. He continued to look higher, sweeping the goggles upward. He saw the huge head of the Tyrannosaurus, just standing there, looking over the fence at the two Land Cruisers. The lightning flashed again, and the big animal rolled his head and bellowed in the glaring light. Then darkness, and silent again, and the pounding rain. Tim?
Yes, Dr. Grant.
You see what it is?
Yes, Dr. Grant.
Tim had the sense that Dr. Grant wasn't trying to talk in a way that wouldn't upset his sister.
What's going on right now?
Nothing, Tim said, watching the Tyrannosaur through his night vision goggles. Just standing on the other side of the fence.
I can't see much from here, Tim.
I can see it fine, Dr. Grant. It's just standing there.
Okay.
There was another pause. Tim watched the Tyrannosaur. The head was huge. The animal looked from one vehicle to another, then back again. It seems to stare right at Tim. In the goggles, the eyes glowed bright green. Tim felt a chill, but then, as he looked down the animal's body, moving down from the massive head to jaw, he saw the small, muscular forelimbs. It waved in the rain, and then it gripped to the fence. Jesus Christ, Ed Regis said, staring out the window. But he could feel his knees begin to shake uncontrollably, his trousers flapping like flags. Jesus, he was frightened. He didn't want to be here, alone among all the people in the two cars. Ed Regis knew what a dinosaur attack was like. He knew what happened to people. He had seen the mangled bodies that results from a raptor attack. He could picture it in his mind. But this was a Rex. Much, much bigger. The greatest meat-eater that ever walked the earth. Ed Regis felt a screed of warmth in his trousers. He was simultaneously embarrassed and terrified. But he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just stay here. He had to do something. Something! His hands were shaking, trembling against the dash. Tim heard the sound of the door opening, and he swung his head away from the Tyrannosaur, in time to see Ed Regis stepping out through the open door, ducking his head in the rain. Ed Regis just turned and ran in the opposite direction from the Tyrannosaur, disappearing into the woods. The door of the Land Cruiser hung open. The paneling was getting wet. "He left," Lex said. "Where did he go? He left us alone." "Shut the door," Tim said. "He left us. He left us." Tim leaned forward to try to shut the door. From the back of the seat, he couldn't reach the handle. He looked back at the Tyrannosaur, at lightning's flashing again. Momentarily, Silk hooded a huge black shape against the white flaring sky. He blinked to recover his vision. When he looked again, the Tyrannosaur was standing there, exactly as before, motionless and huge, rain dripping from his jaws. The formling gripped the fence. And then Tim realized the Tyrannosaur was holding onto the fence. The fence wasn't electrified anymore. "Lex, close the door!" "Tim!"
I'm here, Dr. Grant.
"What's going on?"
Regis ran away.
"He what?"
He ran away. I think he saw the fence isn't electrified.
Did he say the fence isn't electrified? There was nothing for Tim to do but climb out of the back door in the slashing rain, and he shut the door for her. The thunder grumbled, and the lightning flashed again. Tim looked up and saw the Tyrannosaur crashing down the cyclone fence with its giant hind limb. He jumped back and slammed the door. The sound lost when the thunder clapped.
Tim, are you there?
He grabbed the radio. "I'm here." He turned to Lex.
Lock the doors. Get in the middle of the car.
"Tim,
Yes, Dr. Grant.
stay in the car. Stay down. Be quiet. Don't move.
And don't make noise.
Okay?"
You should be alright. I don't think it can open cars. Just stay quiet so you don't arouse his attention any more than necessary.
"Okay." Tim clicked the radio off. "You heard that, Lex?" "It's okay. I don't think it saw us." In the other car, Malcolm gasped. "Jesus, what happened to the car?" Grant blinked his eyes as the lightning faded. The other car was gone. Grant couldn't believe it. He peered forward, trying to see through the rain-streaked windshield. The dinosaur's body was so large, it was probably just blocking. In another flash of lightning, he saw clearly the car was gone. "What happened?" Malcolm said. "I don't know." "Can you see?" Malcolm said, squinted. "Not much, no," Grant said. The rain pounded onto the roof of the car. He listened for the little girl, but he didn't hear her anymore. The two men sat in the car, listening. "Was it the girl?" Malcolm said finally. "It sounded like the girl." "It did, yes." "Was it?" "I don't know," Grant said. Blurring through the raining windshield, the dinosaur was coming towards their car. Slow, ominous strays coming right towards them. You know, at times like this one feels, well, perhaps extinct animals should be left extinct. Don't you have that feeling now? Yes, Grant said. He was feeling his heart pounding. Do you, have any suggestions about what we do now? I can't think of anything, Grant said. What had happened? It was possible the Tyrannosaur hadn't seen him. It seems that it hasn't, but how could that be? No, the Tyrannosaur couldn't see him, not if he stood motionless. And in a detection academic corner of his mind, he found an explanation for that. A reason why. Oh, damn. You look at that. They were sitting in Harding's gasoline-powered Jeep, staring forward passing the flick of the windshield wipers. In the yellow flare of the headlamps, a big fallen tree blocked the road. Must have been the lightning, Gennaro said. Hell of a fall. We can't get past it, Harding said. We better tell Arnold in control. He picked up the radio and twisted the channel dial. Hello, John? Are you there, John? I don't understand. The radio line seems to be down. Must be the storm, Gennaro said. I suppose. Try the land cruisers, Ellie said. Nothing. They're probably back to camp by now, and outside the range of our little set. In any case, I don't think we should stay here. It'll be hours before maintenance gets a crew out here to move that tree. What are you going to do? Ellie said. Go back to the turnout and get into the maintenance road. Fortunately, there's a second road system. We have one road for the visitors, and the second road of animal handlers and feed trucks and so on. We'll drive back at the maintenance road. It's a little longer, and not so scenic. But you may find it interesting. If the rain lets up, we'll get glimpses of some of the animals at night. We should be back in 30-40 minutes, if I don't get lost. Lightning flashed, and every monitor in the control room went black. Arnold sat forward, his body rigid and tense. Jesus, not now. Not now! That was all he needed, to have everything go out in the storm. All the main power circuits were surge protected, of course, but Arnold wasn't sure about the modems Nedry was using for his data transmission. Most people didn't know it was possible to blow an entire system through a modem, and lightning pulse clicked back into the computer through the telephone lines. And bang! No more motherboard, no more RAM, no more file serve, no more computer. The screen flicked, and then, one by one, they came back on. Arnold signed and collapsed back in his chair. He wondered again where Nedry had gone. 5 minutes ago, he had sent guards to search the building for him. The fat bastard was probably in the bathroom reading a comic book. But the guards hadn't come back, and they haven't called in. 5 minutes. If Nedry was in the building, they should have found him by now. Somebody took the damn Jeep, Muldoon said, as he came back in the room. Have you talked to the land cruisers yet? Can't raise them on the radio, Arnold said. I have to use this because the main board is down. It's weak, but that'll work. I have tried all 6 channels. I know they have radios in their cars, but they're not answering. That's not good, Muldoon said. If you want to go out there, take one of the maintenance vehicles. I would, but they're in the east garage, more than a mile from here. Where's Harding? I assume he's on his way back. Then he'll pick the people in the Land Cruisers on his way. I assume so. Anybody tell Hammond the kids aren't back yet? Hell no, Arnold said. I don't want that son of a bitch running around here screaming at me. Everything's alright for the moment. The Land Cruisers are just stuck in the rain. They can sit a while until Harding brings them back. Or until we find Nedry and make that little bastard turn the system back on. You can't get them back on? Arnold shook his head. I have been trying. But Nedry's done something to the system. I can't figure out what, but if I had to go into the codes itself, that'll take hours. We need Nedry. You've got to find the son of a bitch right away. The sign says electrified fence, 10,000 volts, do not touch. But Nedry opened it with his bare hands and unlocked the gate, swinging it wide. He went back to the Jeep, drove through the gate, and then walked back to close it behind him. Now he was inside the park itself, no more than a mile from the east dock. He stepped on the accelerator and hunches forward over the steering wheel, peering through the rain-slashed windshield as he drove the Jeep down to the narrow road. He was driving too fast, but he had to keep his timetable. He was surrounded on all sides by black jungle, but soon he should be able to see the beach and the ocean off to his left. This damn storm might screw up everything, because if Dockson's boat wasn't waiting for him at the east dock when he got there, the whole plan will be ruined. Nedry couldn't wait very long, or he might miss back at the control room. The whole idea behind the plan was that he could drive to the east dock, drop the embryos, and be back in a few minutes before everyone noticed. It was a clever plan. Nedry had worked on it carefully, refining every detail. This plan was going to make him $1.5 million, 1.5 meg. That was 10 years of income in a single tax-free shot, and it was going to change his life. Nedry be damn careful, even to the point of making Dachshund to meet him at the San Francisco airport at the last minute with an excuse about wanting to see the money. Actually, Nedry wanted to record his conversation with Dachshund and mention him by name in the tape, just so that Dachshund wouldn't forget he owed the rest of the money. Nedry was including a copy of the tape with embryos. In short, Nedry had thought of everything, except this damn storm. Something dashed across the road. A white flash in his headlight. It looked like a large rat. It scurried into the underbush, dragging his fat tail. Amazing that a possum could survive here. You'd think that dinosaurs would get an animal like that. He was driving fast, and he'd already been gone for 5 minutes. He should have reached the east dock by now. Had he taken the wrong turn? He didn't think so. He hadn't seen any forks in the road at all. And where was the dock? It was a shock when he came around a corner and saw that the road terminated in a gray concrete barrier 6 feet tall and screeded dark with the rain. He slammed into the brakes, the Jeep fist-tailing, losing traction into end-to-end spin. And for a horrified moment, he thought he was going to smash into the barrier. And he spun the wheel frantically, and the Jeep split into a stop, headlamps just a few feet from the concrete wall. He obviously taken the wrong turn somewhere. He could retrace his steps, but that would take too long. He had better try and find out where the hell he was. He got out of the Jeep, feeling heavy raindrops spattering his head. It was a real tropical storm, raining so hard that it hurt. He glanced at his watch, pushing the button illuminating in a digital dial. 6 minutes gone. He walked around the concrete barrier, and on the other side along the rain, he heard the sound of gurgling water. Nedry hurried forward, his eyes adjusted to the darkness as he went. Dense jungle on all sides, raindrops splattering on the leaves. The gargling sound became louder, drawing him forward, and suddenly he came out of the foliage and felt his feet sink into the soft earth, and saw the dark current of the river. He was at a jungle river. Damn, he thought. At the river where? The river ran miles through the island. He looked at his watch again, 7 minutes gone. You have a problem, Dennis. Nedry hardly noticed. He was worried about his plan. The plain fact was the time had run out. There wasn't any choice anymore. He had to abandon his original plan. That hadn't really sounded like an owl. It seems to be close by, in the jungle somewhere off to his right. Nedry began to run. He made a lot of noise as he ran, but even so, he could hear the animal crashing through the foliage, and the hooting was coming closer. And then he froze. The animal was already there. But it wasn't close. The dinosaur stood 40 feet away at the edge of the illumination from the headlamps. Nedry waited to see if the animal would attack, but it didn't. Perhaps the headlights from the Jeep frightened it, forcing it to keep its distance like a fire. The earth shook beneath him, and Nedry knew the dinosaur was moving. He could hear its soft hooting again. And despite the pain, he forced his eyes open and still saw nothing but flashing spots against black. Slowly the realization came to him. He was blind. The hooting was louder as Nedry scrambled to his feet and staggered back against the side panel of the car. As a wave of nausea and dizziness swept over him, the dinosaur was closer now. He could feel it coming closer. He was dimly aware of its snorting breath, but he couldn't see. He couldn't see anything, and his terror were extreme. And then there was a new pain on both sides of his head. The pain grew worse, as if he was lifted to his feet. He knew the dinosaur had his head in his jaws, and the horror of realization was followed by one final wish, that it'll be over soon. More coffee? Hammond asked politely. No, thank you. I couldn't eat anything more. They were sitting in the dining room at Hammond's bungalow, in a scheduled corner of the park, not far from the labs. Wu had to admit that the bungalow Hammond had built for himself was elegant, with spars, almost Japanese lines, and the dinner had been excellent, considering the dining room wasn't fully staffled yet. But there was something about Hammond that Wu found troubling. The old man was different in some way. Stubbornly different. All during dinner, Wu had tried to decide what it was. In part, a tendency to ramble, to repeat himself, to retell old stories. In part, it was an emotional lability, flaring anger one moment, mild in sentimentality the next. John Hammond was, after all, almost 77, but there was something else, a stubborn invasiveness, and insisted on having his way. And in the end, a complete refusal to deal with the situation that now faced the park. Henry Wu wanted to check the data at once, but Hammond had stubbornly insisted Wu accompany him at dinner. Now then, Henry, you must save room for ice cream, Hammond said, pushing back from the table. Maria makes the most wonderful ginger ice cream. All right. Wu looked at the beautiful silent serving girl. His eyes followed her out the room, and then glanced up at the single video monitor mounted in the wall. The monitor was dark. Your monitor's out, Wu said. Is it? Hammond glanced over. Must be the storm. I'll just check with John in control. Lines must be down. Or maybe Nedry's still doing data transmissions. He has quite a few bugs to fix this weekend. Nedry's a genius in his way, but we had to press him quite hard, towards the end, to make sure he get things right. Perhaps I should go to the control room and check, Wu said. No, Hammond said. There's no reason. If there were any problems, we'd hear about it. Maria came back into the room with 2 plates of ice cream. You must have just a little, Henry, Hammond said. It's made with fresh ginger from the eastern part of the island. It's an old man's Vice ice cream. But still. That was close, Wu said. I hope the storm isn't frightening the children. I shouldn't think so, Hammond said. He tasted the ice cream. But I can't help but hold some fear about this park, Henry. Inwardly, Wu felt relief. Perhaps the old man was going to face the facts, after all. What kind of fears? You know, Jurassic Park's really made for children. The children of the world love dinosaurs. And the children are going to delight, just delight, in this place. Their little faces will shine with the joy of finally seeing these wonderful animals. But I am afraid I may not live to see it, Henry. I may not live to see the joy on their faces. I think there are other problems too, Wu said, frowning. But none so pressing on my mind as this, Hammond said, that I may not live to see their shining, delighted faces. This is our triumph, this park. We have done what we set out to do. And you remember, our original intent was to use the newly emerging technology of genetic engineering to make money. A lot of money. Wu knew Hammond was about to launch into one of his old speeches. He held up his hand. I'm familiar with this, John. If you're going to start a bioengineering company, Henry, what will you do? Will you make product to help mankind? To fight illness and disease? Dear me, no. That's a terrible idea. A very poor use of new technology. Hammond shook his head sadly. Yes, you'll remember, he said. The original genetic engineering companies, like Genentech and C2s, were all started to make pharmaceuticals, new drugs for mankind. Noble, noble purpose. Unfortunately, drugs face all kinds of barriers. FDA testing alone takes 5 to 8 years. If you're lucky. Even worse, there are forces at work in the marketplace. Suppose you make a miracle drug for cancer or heart diseases, as Genentech did. Suppose you now want to charge $1,000 or $2,000 a dose. You might imagine that is your privilege. After all, you invented the drug, you paid to develop and test it. You should be able to charge whatever you wish. But do you really think that the government will let you do that? No, Henry, they will not. Sick people aren't going to pay $1,000 a dose for needed medication. They won't be grateful. They'll be outraged. Blue Cross isn't going to pay it. They'll scream highway robbery. So something will happen. Your patent applications will be denied. Your permits will be delayed. Something will force you to see reason and to sell your drugs at a low cost. From a business standpoint, that makes helping mankind is very risky business. Personally, I would never help mankind. Wu had heard this argument before, and he knew Hammond was right. Some new bioengineering pharmaceuticals had indeed suffered inexplicable delays and patent problems. Hammond finished his ice cream, and Maria silently took the dish away. She's not from here, you know. She's Haitian. Her mother is French. But in any case, Henry, you will recall that the original purpose behind pointing my company in this direction in the first place was to have freedom from government interventions anywhere in the world. Speaking of the rest of the world, Hammond smiled. We have already laced a large track in the Azores for Jurassic Park Europe. And you know, long ago we obtained an island near Guam for Jurassic Park Japan. Construction on the next 2 Jurassic Parks will begin early next year. They will all be open within 4 years. At the time, direct revenues will exceed $10 billion a year, and merchandising, television, and auxiliary rights should double that. I see no reason to bother with children's pets, which I'm told Lou Doxon thinks we're planning to make. $20 billion a year, Wu said softly, shaking his head. That's speaking consummatorily, Hammond said. He smiled. There's no reason to speculate wildly. More ice cream, Henry? Sorry, Harding said. In the headlamps, Ellie saw a herd of apatosaurs lumbering across the road. There were 6 animals, each the size of a house, and a baby as large as a full-grown horse. The apatosaurs moved in unhurried silence, never looking towards the jeep and its glowing headlamps. At one point, the baby stopped to lap water from a puddle in the road, then moved on. A comparable herd of elephants would have been startled by the arrival of a car, would have trumpeted and circled to protect the baby. But these animals showed no fear. Don't they see us? Not exactly, no, Harding said. Of course, in a literal sense, they do see us, but we don't really mean anything to them. We hardly even take cars out at night, and so they have no experience on them. We're just strange, smelly objects in their environment. representing no threat, and therefore no interest. I have occasionally been out at night, visiting a sick animal, and on my way back, these fellows blocked the road for an hour or more. What do you do? Harding grinned. Play a recorded Tyrannosaur roar. That gets them moving. Not that they care much about Tyrannosaurs. These apatosaurs are so big they don't really have any predators. They can break a Tyrannosaurus' neck with a whip of their tail. And they know it. So does the Tyrannosaur. But they do see us. I mean, if we're getting out of the car, they probably won't react. Dinosaurs have excellent visual acuity, but they have a basic amphibian visual system. It's attuned to movement. They don't see unmoving things well at all. The animals move on, their skin glittering in the rain. Harding put the car in gear. I think we can continue on now. I suspect you may find there are pressures in your park, just as there are pressures in Genetech's drugs. He and Hammond had moved to the living room, and they were now watching the storm lash the big glass window. I can't see how, Hammond said. The scientists may wish to constrain you, even to stop you. Well, they can't do that, Hammond said. He shook his finger at Wu. You know why the scientists would try to do that? It's because they want to do research, of course. That's all they ever want to do, is research. Not to accomplish anything. Not to make any progress. Just do research. Well, they have a surprise coming to them. I wasn't thinking of that, Wu said. I'm sure it would be interesting for the scientists to do research. But you arrive at the point where these animals are simply too expensive to be used for research. This is wonderful technology, Henry, but it's also frightfully expensive technology. The fact is, it can only be supported as entertainment. That's just the way it is. But if there are attempts to close down, face the damn facts, Henry, Hammond said irritably. This isn't America. This isn't even Costa Rica. This is my island. I own it. And nothing is going to stop me from opening Jurassic Park to all the children of the world. Or at least to the rich ones. And I tell you, they'll love it. We're near the Jungle River now, Harding said as he drove. It's off there somewhere to our left. Well, you're getting quite a show tonight. Those are compies. Proconsagathists, Ellie thought, wishing that Grant were here to see them. This was the animal they had seen in the facts back in Montana. Odd, Harding said. Wonder where they're off to. Compies don't usually move at night, you know. They climb up in a tree and wait for daylight. Then why are they out now? Ellie said. I can't imagine. You know, compies are scavengers, like buzzards. They're attracted to a dying animal, and they have tremendously sensitive smell. They can smell a dying animal for miles. Then they're going to a dying animal? Dying, or already dead. Should we follow them? Ellie said. I'd be curious, Harding said. Yes, why not? Let's go see where they're going. Tim Murphy lay in the Land Cruiser, his cheek pressed against the car handle. He drifted slowly back to consciousness. He wanted only to sleep. He shifted his position and felt the pain in his cheekbone where it lay against the metal door. His whole body ached, his arms and legs, and most of all his head. There was a trembling, pounding pain in his head. All the pain made him want to go back to sleep. Tim groaned. He rolled onto his back, turning away from the puddle of vomit. The pain in his head made him breathe in short, shallow gasps. And He still felt sick, as if everything were moving. He opened his eyes and looked around, trying to get his bearings. He was inside the Land Cruiser, but the car must have been flipped over on its side, because he was lying on his back against the passenger door. Looking up at the steering wheel and beyond, at the branches of a tree, moving in the wind, the rain had nearly stopped, but water drops still fell on through the broken front windshield. He stared curiously at the fragments of glass. He couldn't remember how the windshield had broken. He couldn't remember anything except that he had been parked on the road. He had been talking to Dr. Grant when the Tyrannosaur came towards them. That was the last thing he remembered. The whole car was moving. Tentatively, Tim rose to his feet, standing on the passenger door. He peered over the dashboard, looking out through the shattered windshield. The ground was 20 feet below him. Oh shit. What was he going to do? He stood on his tiptoes and peered out, trying to see better, grabbing the steering wheel for support. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. He had to get out of there. He looked down at his feet. He was standing on the door handle. He crouched back down on his hands and knees to look at the handle. He couldn't see very well in the dark, but he could tell that the door was bended outward, so the handle couldn't turn. He had never get the door open. He tried to roll the window down, but the window was stuck too. Then he thought of the back door. Maybe he could open that. He leaned over to the front seat, and the Land Cruiser lurched with a shift in weight. Carefully, Tim reached back and twisted the handle at the rear door. It was stuck too. How was he going to get out? A dark shape passed below him. It wasn't a Tyrannosaur. It was the Stegosaur, apparently recovered from his illness. Tim wondered where the other people were. Gennaro and Sattler and the vet. He had last seen them near the Stegosaur. How long ago was that? He looked at his watch, but the face was cracked. He couldn't see the numbers. He took the watch off and tossed it aside. Tim grabbed the handle, tried to force it, but it was stuck solid. It wouldn't move at all. Then he realized what was wrong. The rear door was locked. Holding his breath, he crawled slowly back into the rear seat. The Land Cruiser creaked, but it held its position. Gripping the door ports on both sides, through the narrow angle opening from the door. Soon he was lying flat on his stomach on the slatted door, his legs sticking out of the car. He kicked in the air. His feet touched something solid, a branch, and he rested his weight on it. Get away! Go on! Go! Tim leaned against the crumbling Land Cruiser and looked around in the darkness. He had to get back to the others, but he didn't want to get lost. He knew he was somewhere in the park, probably not far from the main road. If he could only get his bearings, he couldn't see much in the dark, but then he remembered the goggles. He climbed through the shattered front window into the Land Cruiser and found the night vision goggles and the radio. The radio was broken and silent, so he left it behind, but the goggles still worked. Wearing the goggles, he saw the battered fence off to his left and walked towards it. The fence was 12 feet high, but the Tyrannosaur had flattened it easily. Tim hurried across it, moving through an area of dense foliage, and came out into the main road. Through his goggles, he saw the other Land Cruiser turn on its side. He ran towards it, took a breath, and looked inside. The car was empty. No sign of Dr. Grant and Dr. Malcolm. Where'd they have gone? Where had everyone gone? He felt sudden panic, standing alone in the jungle road at night with that empty car. He turned quickly in circles, seeing the bright green world and the goggles swirl. Something pale by the side of the road caught his eye. It was Lex's baseball. He wiped the mud out of it. Lex! 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 The night seemed to close in around him. Feeling sorry for himself, he sat in a cold, rainy puddle in the road, whimpering for a while. And suddenly he stopped. He still heard whimpering. It was faint, and it was coming from somewhere farther up the road. How long has it been? Muldoon said, coming back into the control room. He was carrying a black metal case. Half an hour. Harding's Jeep should be back here by now. Arnold stumped out his cigarette. I'm sure they'll arrive any minute now. Still no sign of Nedry? Muldoon said. No, not yet. I'm going to distribute these two people in the building. Take the charger too. They are our emergency radios. But nobody has them plugged in naturally. Let it charge about 20 minutes, and then try and race the cars. Henry Wu opened the door marked fertilization and entered the darkened lab. There was nobody here. Apparently, all the technicians were still in the dinner. Wu went directly to the computer terminal and punched up the DNA logbooks. The logbooks had been kept in the computer. DNA was such a large molecule that each species required 10 gigabytes of optical disk space to store details of all the iterations. He was going to have to check all 15 species. That was an extreme amount of information to search through. He still wasn't clear about why Grant thought frog DNA was important.
Wu himself didn't often distinguish one kind of DNA from another. After all, most DNA in living creatures was exactly the same. DNA was an incredibly ancient substance. Human beings walking around in the streets of the modern world, bouncing their pink new babies, hardly stopped to think that the substance at the center of it all, the substance that began the dance of life, was a chemical almost as old as the Earth itself. The DNA molecule was so old that its evolution had essentially finished more than 2 billion years ago. There had been little new since that time. Just a few recent combinations of the old genes and not much of that. When you compared the DNA of man and the DNA of a lowly bacterium, you found that only about 10% of the strands were different. This innate conservatism of DNA emboldened Wu to use whatever DNA he wished. In making his dinosaurs, Wu had manipulated the DNA as a sculptor might clay or marble. He had created freely.
He started a computer search program, knowing it would take 2 or 3 minutes to run. He got up and walked around the lab, checking instruments out of the long-standing habits. He noted the recorder outside the freezer door, which tracked the freezer temperature. He saw there was a spike in the gap. That was odd, he thought. It meant somebody had been in the freezer, recently too, within the last half hour. But who would go in there at night? The results were clear. All breeding dinosaurs incorporated rana, or frog DNA. None of the other animals did. Wu still did not understand why this had caused them to breed. But he could no longer deny Grant was right. The dinosaurs were breeding. He hurried up to the control room. She was curled up inside a big 1-meter drain pipe that ran under the road. She had her baseball glove in her mouth, and she was rocking back and forth, banging her head repeatedly against the back of the pipe. It was dark in there, but he could see her clearly with his goggles. She seems unhurt, but he felt a great burst of relief. "Lex, it's me, Timmy." She didn't answer. She continued banging her head on the pipe. "Come on out." She shook her head no. He could see she was badly frightened. "Lex, if you come out, I'll let you wear these night goggles." She just shook her head. "Look what I have," he said, holding up his hand. "It's your ball, Lex. I found your ball." "So what?" He tried another approach. "It must be uncomfortable in there. Cold, too. Would you like to come out?" She resumed banging her head against the pipe. "Why not?" "There's animals out there." That threw him off for a moment. She hasn't said animals for years. The animals are gone. "There's a big one, a Tyrannosaurus Rex." "He's gone." "Where did he go?" "I don't know, but he's not around here," Tim said, hoping it was true. Lex didn't move. He heard her banging again. He sat down in the grass outside the pipe, where she could see him. The ground was wet where he was sat. He hung his knees and waited. He couldn't think of anything else to do. "I'm just going to sit here and rest." "Are there any grown-ups out there?" Lex said. "Not yet, but I'm sure they'll come soon. They're probably on their way right now." Then he heard her moving inside the pipe, and she came out, shivering with cold, and with dry blood on her forehead, but otherwise all right. "Where's Dr. Grant?" "I don't know." "Well, he was here before." "He was? When?" "Before," Lex said. "I saw him when I was in the pipe." "Where did he go?" "How am I supposed to know?" Lex said, wrinkling her nose. She began to shout for Dr. Grant. Tim was uneasy at the noise she was making. It might bring back the Tyrannosaur. But a moment later, he heard an answering shout. It was coming from the right, over towards the Land Cruiser that Tim had left a minute before. With his goggles, Tim saw with relief that Dr. Grant was walking towards them. He had a big tear in his shirt at the shoulder, but otherwise, he looked okay. "Thank God," he said. "I have been looking for you." Shivering, Ed Regis got to his feet and wiped the cold mud off his face and hands. He had spent a very bad half hour, wedged among the big boulders on the slump of the hill below the road. He knew it wasn't much of a hiding place, but he was panicked and he wasn't thinking clearly. He had laid on this muddy cold place and he had tried to get a hold of himself, but he kept seeing that dinosaur in his mind, that dinosaur coming towards him, towards the car. Ed Regis didn't remember exactly what had happened after that. He remembered that Lex had said something, but he hasn't stopped. He couldn't stop. He had just kept running and running. Beyond the road, he had lost his footing and tumbled down the hill and came to a rest by some boulders. And it had seemed to him that he could crawl in among the boulders and hide. There was enough room, so that was what he had done. Gasping and terrified, thinking of nothing except to get away from the Tyrannosaur. And finally, when he was wedged into like a rat between the boulders, he had calmed down a little. And he had been overcome with horror and shame because he abandoned those kids. He had just run away. He had just saved himself. He knew he should go back up there to the road. He should try to rescue them, because he had always imagined himself as a brave and cool under pressure. But whenever he tried to get control of himself, to make himself go back up there, somehow he just couldn't. He started to feel panicky, and he had trouble breathing, and he didn't move. He told himself it was hopeless anyway. If the kids were up there in the road, they could never survive. And certainly there was nothing Ed Regis could do for them. He might as well stay where he was. No one was going to know what had happened except him. And there was nothing he could do. Nothing he could have done. And so Regis had remained among the boulders for half an hour, fighting off panic, carefully not thinking about whether the kids had died, or about what Hammond would have to say when he finds out. What finally made him move was a peculiar sensation he noticed in his mouth. The side of his mouth felt funny, kind of knobbed and tingly, and he wondered he hurt during the fall. Ed Regis touched his face and felt a swelling flesh on the side of his mouth. It was funny, but it didn't hurt at all. Then he realized the swelling flesh was a leech growing fat as it sucked his lips. It was practically in his mouth. Shivering with nausea, Regis pulled the leech away, feeling a tear from his flesh with his lips, feeling the gush of warm blood in his mouth. He spat and flung it with disgust into the forest. He saw another leech in his forearm and pulled it off, leaving a dark, bloody stream behind. Jesus, he was probably covered with them. That fall down the hillside. These jungle hills were full of leeches. So were the dark, rocky crevices. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard Lex calling to Dr. Grant. Jesus, that was the little girl. Ed Regis listened to the tone of her voice. She didn't sound frightened or in pain. She was just calling in an insistent way, and it slowly dawned on him that something else might have happened, that the Tyrannosaur must have gone away, or at least hasn't attacked, and the other people might still be alive. And the realization made him pull himself together in an instinct. The way you got sober in an instinct, when the cops pulled you over, and he felt better. Because now he knew what he had to do, and as he crawled out of the boulder, he was already formulating the next step. Already figured out what he would say, how to handle things from this point. Regis wiped the cold mud off his face and hand. The evidence that he had been hiding. He wasn't embarrassed that he had been hiding, but now he had to take charge. He scrambled back up towards the road, but when he emerged from the foliage, he had a moment of disorientation. He didn't see the cars at all. He was somehow at the bottom of the hill. The Land Cruiser must be at the top. He started walking up the hill, back towards the Land Cruisers. It was very quiet, his feet splashing into the muddy puddles. He couldn't hear the little girl anymore. Why had she stopped calling? As he walked, he began to think that maybe something had happened to her. In that case, he shouldn't walk back there. Maybe the Tyrannosaur was still hanging around. Here he was, already at the bottom of the hill. That's much closer to home. And it was so quiet. Spooky. It was so quiet. Ed Regis turned around and started walking back towards the camp. Alan Grant ran his hands over her limbs, squeezing the arms and legs briefly. She didn't seem to have any pain. It was amazing, aside from the cut on her head. She was fine. The boy was not quite so fortunate. Tim's nose was swelling and painful. Grant suspected it was broken. His right shoulder was badly bruised and swelling, but his legs seemed to be alright. Both kids could walk. That was the important thing. Grant himself was alright, except for a claw impressing down his right chest, where the Tyrannosaur had kicked him. It burned with every breath, but it didn't seem to be serious, and it didn't limit his movement. He wondered if he was being knocked unconscious, because he had only dim recollection of the events immediately presenting the moment he had been set up, groaning in the wood 10 yards from the Land Cruiser. At first, his chest had been bleeding, so he had stuck leaves on the wound, and after a while it closed. Then he had started walking around, looking for Malcolm and the kids. Grant couldn't believe he was still alive, and as scattered images began to come back to him, he tried to make sense of them. The Tyrannosaur should have killed them all earlier. Why hasn't it? I'm hungry, Lex said. Me too, Grant said. We got to get ourselves back to civilization, and we got to tell them about the ship. We're the only ones who knows? Yes, we have got to get back and tell them. Then let's walk down the road towards the hotel, Tim said, pointing down the hill. That way we'll meet them when they come for us. Grant considered that, and he kept thinking about one thing. The dark shape that had crossed between the Land Cruisers even before the attack started. What animal had that been? He could think of only one possibility. The little Tyrannosaur. I don't think so, Tim. The road has higher fences on both sides. If one of the Tyrannosaurs is farther down the road, we'll be trapped. Then should we wait here? Yes, Grant said. Let's just wait here until somebody comes. I hope it won't be very long, Grant said. I don't want to stay here, Lex said. Then from the bottom of the hill, they heard the sound of a man coughing. Stay here, Grant said. He ran forward to look down the hill. Tim ran forward after him. Lex followed her brother. Don't leave me! Don't leave me here, you got... Grant clapped his hand over her mouth. She struggled to protest. He shook his head and pointed over the hill for her to look. At the bottom of the hill, Grant saw Ed Regis standing rigid, unmoving. The forest around him had become deadly silent. The steady background drums of cicadas and frogs had ceased abruptly. There was only the faint rustling of leaves. and the whine of the wind. Lex started to speak, but Grant pulled her against the tree trunk of the nearest tree, ducking down amongst the heavy gnarly roots at the base. Tim came in right after them. Grant put his hands to his lips, signaling them to be quiet, and then he slowly looked around the tree. The road below was dark, and as the branches of the big tree moved in the wind, the moonlight flitted through and made a dampling, shifting patterns. Ed Regis was gone. It took Grant a moment to locate him. The public was pressed up against the trunk of the big tree, hugging it. Regis wasn't moving at all. The forest remained silent. Lex tugged impatiently at Grant's shirt. She wanted to know what was happening. Then, from somewhere very near, they heard a soft snorting exhalation, hardly louder than the wind. Lex heard it too, because she stopped struggling. The sound floated towards them again, soft as a sigh. Grant thought it was almost like the breathing of a horse. Grant looked at Regis and saw the moving shadow cast by the moonlight on the trunk of the tree. And then Grant realized there was another shadow, superimposed on the others, but not moving. A strong curved neck and a squared head. The exhalation came again. Tim leaned cautiously to look. Lex did too. They heard a crack as a branch broke, and into the path stepped a Tyrannosaur. It was the juvenile, about 8 feet tall, and it moved with a clumsy gaze of a young animal, almost like a puppy. The juvenile Tyrannosaur shoved down the path, stopping with every step to sniff the air before moving on. It passed the tree where Regis was hiding, and gave no indication that it had seen him. Grant saw Regis' body relax slightly. Regis turned his head, trying to watch the Tyrannosaur on the far side of the tree. The Tyrannosaur was now out of view down the road, and Regis started to relax, releasing his grip on the tree. But the jungle remained silent. Regis remained close to the tree trunks for another half a minute. Then the sound of the forest returned, the first tentative croak of tree frogs, the buzz of one cicada, and then the full chorus. Regis stepped away from the tree, shaking his shoulders, releasing the tension. He walked into the middle of the road, looking in the direction of the departed Tyrannosaur. The attack came from the left. The juvenile roared. It swung its big head forward, knocking Regis flat to the ground. He yelled and scrambled to his feet, but the Tyrannosaur pounced, and it must have pinned him with his hind leg, because suddenly Regis wasn't moving. He was sitting up in the path, shouting at the dinosaur, waving his hands at it, as if he could scare it off. The young dinosaur seemed perplexed by the sound and movement coming from its tiny prey. The juvenile bent its head over, sniffing curiously, and Regis pounded on the snout with his fist. Get away! Back off! Go on, back off! Regis was shouting at the top of his lungs, and the dinosaur backed away, allowing Regis to get to his feet. Yeah, you heard me! Back off! Get away! As he moved away from the dinosaur, the juvenile continued to stare curiously at the odd, noisy little animal before it. But when Regis had gone a few paces, it lunged and knocked him down again. It's playing with him, Grant thought. Regis shouted as he fell, but the juvenile did not pursue him, allowing him to get to his feet. He jumped to his feet and continued backing away. You stupid! Back! Back! You hear me? Back! He shouted like a lion tamer. The juvenile roared, but it did not attack, and now Regis edged towards the trees and high foliage to the right. In another few steps, he would be hiding. Back! Back, you! Back! Ed Regis shouted, and then, at the last moment, the juvenile pounced and knocked Regis flat on his back. Cut that out! Regis yelled, and the juvenile ducked his head, and Regis began to scream. The scream cut off abruptly, and when the juvenile lifted his head, Grant saw ragged flesh on his jaws. Oh no, Lex said softly. Beside her, Tim had turned away, suddenly nauseated. His night vision goggles slipped from his forehead and landed on the ground with a metallic click. The juvenile's head snapped up and looked towards the top of the hill. Tim picked up his goggles as Grant grabbed both children's hands and began to run. Is that a light? Could be, Harding said. Looks almost like headlights.
You there?
Ah, there it is. Finally. Yes, John, we're here. We're near the river following the compies. It's quite interesting.
Need your car.
What's he saying? Something about a car, Ellie said. At Grant's dig in Montana, Ellie was the one who operated on radiophone. After years of experience, she had become skilled at picking up garbage transmissions. I think he said he needs your car. John, are you there? We can't read you very well. John?
Where are you?
We're 1 mile north of the Hitsy paddock, near the river following some compies.
No. Damn well. Get back here. Ow!
Sounds like he's got problems, Ellie said, frowning. There was no mistaking the tension in his voice. Maybe we should go back. John's frequently got a problem. You know how engineers are. They want everything to go by the book. John, say again, please.
Muldoon. Need your car. Ow!
Is he saying Muldoon needs our car? That's what it sounds like, Ellie said. Well, that doesn't make any sense.
Other duck. Muldoon wants car.
I get it. The other cars are stuck on the road in the storm, and Muldoon wants to go get them. Why doesn't Muldoon take the other car? John, tell Muldoon to take the other car. It's in the garage.
Not listening. Crazy bastard. Car.
I said it's in the garage, John. The car is in the garage.
Nedry has things. One.
I'm afraid this isn't getting us anywhere, Harding said. All right, John. We're coming in now. He turned the radio off and turned the car around. I just wish I understand what the urgency is. Harding put the Jeep in gear, and they rumbled down the road in the darkness. It was another 10 minutes before they saw the welcoming lights of the safari lodge. And as Harding pulled to a stop in front of the visitor center, they saw Muldoon coming towards them. He was shouting and waving his arms.
God damn it, Arnold, you son of a bitch! God damn it, get this park back on track! Now! Get my grandkids back here! Now!
John Hammond stood in the control room, screaming and stamping his little feet. He had been carrying on this way for the last 2 minutes, while Henry Wu stood in the corner. Well, Mr. Hammond, Arnold said, Muldoon's on his way right now to do exactly that. Arnold turned away and lit another cigarette. Hammond was like every other manager guy Arnold had ever seen. Whether it was Disney or the Navy, management guys always behaved the same. They never understood the technical issues, and they thought that screaming was the way to make things happen. And maybe it was, if you were shouting at your secretaries to get you a limousine. But screaming didn't make any difference at all to the problems that Arnold now faced. The computers didn't care if it was screamed at. The power network didn't care if it was screamed at. Technical systems were completely indifferent to all this explosive human emotions. If anything, screaming was counterproductive, because Arnold now faced the virtual certainty that Nedry wasn't coming back, which meant that Arnold himself had to go into the computer codes and try figure out what had gone wrong. It was going to be a painstaking job. He had needed to be calm and careful. Why don't you go downstairs to the cafeteria, Arnold said, and get a cup of coffee. We'll call you when we have more news. I don't want a Malcolm effect here, Hammond said. Don't worry about a Malcolm effect. Will you let me go to work? God damn you, Hammond said. I'll call you, sir, when I have news for Muldoon, Arnold said. Arnold was no longer operating the computer, the line-by-line instructions that told the computer how to behave. Arnold was unhappily aware that the complete Jurassic Park program contained more than 500,000 lines of code, most of it undocumented, without explanation. What are you doing, John? Checking the code. By inspection? That'll take forever. Tell me, Arnold said. Tell me.